There are moments in history when pressure does not simply increase, it reorganizes everything. Scripture does not treat those moments as random. Scripture treats them as seasons, and seasons can be discerned. Genesis 41 is one of the clearest chapters in the whole Bible for understanding how God warns before systems break, how God confirms what he has shown, how God raises a prepared vessel, and how a people survive because obedience becomes structure. This chapter is not only prophetic, it is operational. It shows a complete pattern, warning, confirmation, interpretation, strategy, storage, distribution, preservation. Where this fits in the Joseph Signal Stacks, this teaching is the interlude between Stack 1 and Stack 2 inches, the Joseph Signal Stacks. Stack 1 is land conditions. That is where the warning first becomes visible. The ground speaks. The water cycle shifts. The harvest begins to thin. How to survive and thrive in Goshen during the era of the New World Order teaches that the first warning in Joseph's story is not a market crash, not a war briefing, not a scandal in the palace. The first warning is agricultural because famine H 7458 is born in the earth before it is priced in the marketplace. When the ground starts speaking, heaven is already saying something. Stack 2 is supply chain and distribution gates. After land signals, pressure shifts into movement. It enters transport, storage, and access. In this layer, the question is no longer only whether provision exists. The question becomes who can reach it, who can afford it, and who is allowed through the gate. Genesis 41 is the turning point between these two layers. It starts with scorched grain and devouring cycles, then it shifts into measurable governance, the 5th H 2569, storehouses in cities, and nations coming for bread. It is the chapter where discernment becomes structure and structure becomes preservation. Who this is for and what this lesson is meant to produce. This teaching is for covenant-minded believers and Goshen builders, disciplined disciples who sense the strain of the hour and want biblical clarity and practical direction. It is for watchmen and intercessors who need language for what they are seeing. It is for Joseph-minded leaders and kingdom stewards who carry responsibility for households, ministries, and communities. The aim is to make Genesis 41 simple, clear, and actionable. The outcomes are clarity without panic and readiness that can be executed. By the end of this teaching, the listener should be able to recognize the tipping point pattern, understand why repeated warnings mean time is short, identify the handoff from land warning to distribution gate, and respond with Joseph wisdom, understanding H 995 and skillful wisdom H 2450 before pressure peaks. Genesis 41 is not only history, it is a map. Genesis 41 is not only a story about the past, it is a map for how tipping points work. A tipping point is the moment strain becomes cascade. It is when problems that used to stay in one sector jump into every sector. At first, a system can absorb stress. But at a tipping point, the system begins transferring stress into families, churches, cities, and nations. Options shrink fast, rules change, supply lines change, access changes. That is when society does not simply suffer, society restructures, and a new normal forms. Genesis 41 gives the sequence with astonishing clarity. The signal appears first in provision systems, then the signal repeats, and repetition is confirmation. Interpretation is required because fear without meaning produces chaos. Policy is required because meaning without action produces loss. Infrastructure is required because policy without capacity collapses under real pressure. Distribution becomes a gate because whoever controls access controls survival. Then a new normal forms because after the pressure test, the old normal cannot return unchanged. Genesis 41 verse 1. The warning begins at the lifeline. Genesis 41 verse 1 places Pharaoh standing by the Nile. That detail is not decoration, it is a location cue. The warning begins where the nation's provision begins. Egypt's river system was its life channel. This is a Joseph governance lesson. In turning point seasons, the alarm often begins at the lifeline, the provision artery the system depends on most. In Egypt, it was the river. In many modern contexts, the lifeline may be water supply, farmland, energy, shipping corridors, major logistics routes, or the systems that move money and goods. The alarm usually starts at the source. Genesis 41 verses 2 to 4. The devouring cycle, Genesis 41 verses 2 to 4, shows 7 healthy cows and 7 diseased cows. 7H 7651 marks a complete cycle, an appointed fullness. Then the diseased cows swallow the healthy cows, yet the consuming cows do not become healthy. In plain language, the weak consumes the strong and nothing improves. This is a symbol covenant-minded believers and Goshen builders must understand. It describes a season where consumption increases and stability is swallowed, but the consuming system does not recover. Resources disappear and nothing gets better. It is loss without repair. Genesis 41 verses 5 to 7, the warning repeats through grain. Genesis 41 verses 5 to 7 repeats the message through grain. 7 full ears rise on one stalk, then 7 thin ears, scorched and dried, and the thin ears swallow the full ears. The passage highlights the east wind, H 6921, and scorching H 7710. Scripture treats the east wind as a harsh, drying force that withers what should grow. Psalm 78 verse 26 shows the east wind under God's control. Ezekiel 17 verse 10 shows the east wind causing plants to wither. The warning is simple. When the environment shifts and the productive system withers, the famine that comes later is already being born now in the land. Genesis 41 verse 8. Interpreter failure is part of the sign. Genesis 41 verse 8 shows the collapse of Egypt's interpreters. The magicians and wise men cannot read the season. This is part of the sign. In turning point moments, system experts can retain technical skill and still lose discernment. This is why Genesis 41 aligns so naturally with Daniel 2 verses 2 to 11. A king receives revelation. The empire's experts fail, and God raises a set-apart servant to interpret. Covenant-minded believers and Goshen builders should learn this without fear. When interpreters fail in a society, confusion becomes its own famine. Amos 8 verses 11 to 12 names a famine of hearing the word of the Lord. A nation can have information everywhere and still lack interpretation. This is also where Joseph's wisdom brings an important framing. Psalm 24 verse 1 differentiates the earth and the world. The earth belongs to the Lord, and the world system operates under a different power structure. 1 John 5 verse 19 reminds us the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. That does not mean believers are defeated. It means believers must understand the difference between what God owns and what the world system tries to run. It means the people of God must learn to spy out the land with discernment, not fascination, so preparation serves God's purposes and not fear. Genesis 41, verses 25 to 32. Prophecy becomes timeline and time advantage. Genesis 41, verse 25, makes the prophetic nature explicit. God has shown what he is about to do. This is not vague forecasting. This is warning with intent. Genesis 41, verses 26 to 27 converts symbols into time. 7 years of abundance, then 7 years of famine, H, 7,458. This is one of the most important governance lessons in the chapter. Revelation is not given only for inspiration. Revelation is given to give time advantage. Genesis 41, verse 32, explains the doubling of the dream. The matter is established by God and it will happen soon. This becomes a living discernment key. When warning signals repeat across different layers, the land, the economy, the movement of goods, and governance shifts, treat it as confirmed and accelerating. That is not a call to fear, it is a call to move while there is still time. Genesis 41, verses 33 to 36. Prophecy demands structure, not emotion. Genesis 41, verses 33 to 36 shows that prophecy is not meant to produce emotion only, it is meant to produce structure. Joseph does not stop at interpretation. Joseph moves into architecture. Genesis 41, verse 33 calls for a discerning and wise leader. Discerning aligns with understanding H 995. Wise aligns with skillful wisdom H 2450. Spiritual maturity is not proved by intensity. It is proved by clarity and execution. End-time pressure punishes sentimental faith and rewards obedient preparation. Genesis 41 verse 34 introduces measurable policy. Take a fifth H 2569. This is intentional reserve strategy. Joseph measures during abundance because scarcity compresses options later. Proverbs 21 verse 20 remains true. Wisdom stores up. Proverbs 6 verses 6 to 8 remains true. Creation teaches preparation. Genesis 41 also establishes a principle that cannot be ignored. Revelation without policy is incomplete. Policy without capacity is fragile. Capacity without righteousness becomes tyranny. Joseph's model holds the tension correctly. Revelation, righteousness, wisdom, and practical infrastructure working together. Genesis 41 verses 37 to 45. Authority transfers and the ring is not jewelry. Genesis 41 verses 37 to 45 shows authority can shift quickly when a tipping point season is near. Pharaoh recognizes something many societies resist. Joseph's qualification is not pedigree. Joseph's qualification is that God has made the matter known and wisdom is present. Genesis 41 verse 38 identifies the Spirit of God in Joseph. Spirit H 7307 and God H 430. Even a pagan ruler recognizes divine enabling because the fruit is measurable, interpretation and strategy. Then the transfer becomes visible. The ring is placed on Joseph's hand. The garments are given. The chariot is prepared. The proclamation is made. The ring represents delegated authority, the legal right to act. Esther 8 verses 8 to 10 shows how a signet functions later. When sealed, the decree carries force. This is the Joseph pattern. In tipping point seasons, authority can move quickly. Those prepared in hiddenness can be positioned publicly because the moment demands their gift. This is why Joseph's wisdom keeps calling Goshen builders to become skilled, disciplined, and ready, so when God opens a door, the assignment is not fumbled. Genesis 41 verses 46 to 57, storehouses are built, then the gate is revealed. Genesis 41 verses 46 to 57 shows the practical side of Joseph's governance. Joseph moves through the land, gathers the grain, and organizes it. Then storage is placed in cities. This is not accidental. It is distributed resilience. It reduces single points of failure. It positions provision near people. It is governance that anticipates pressure. Then famine spreads. Genesis 41 verses 54 to 57 shows famine touching many lands, but bread is found where governance obeyed revelation. The nations come to Joseph for bread. That is the gate reality. In scarcity, access becomes as important as existence. It is not enough that grain exists. It matters who controls distribution, who can transport, who can purchase, who can reach the storehouse, and who is permitted through the gate. This is why Joseph's wisdom emphasizes access risk. In modern systems, access can be denied physically or digitally. A person can be surrounded by abundance and still be locked out of it. That is why this interlude matters. Land warnings are stack 1. Gates of access are stack 2. Genesis 41 shows the handoff. New Testament confirmation, the pattern carries end-time weight. Acts 7 verses 9 to 16 frames Joseph as a deliverer pattern, rejected, then exalted, then used to preserve life. Matthew 24 verse 7 names famines as part of birth pains. Revelation 6 verses 5 to 6 shows famine pressure as an end-time feature that touches daily provision and the cost of essentials. John 6 completes the meaning. Stored grain can preserve bodies for a season, but the bread of life preserves eternally. Practical preparation matters, but provision must never become an idol. Jesus sustains the soul, and his people prepare in peace, not panic. Why the pattern repeats in history, and why signals stack in the present. Joseph's wisdom teaches that Genesis 41 is a template. History shows the same cascade logic. When provision systems fail, the impact does not remain agricultural. It becomes financial, then social, then political. When harvest weakens, pressure rises, rules tighten, and legitimacy is tested. Hydrology becomes economy, economy becomes politics, politics becomes reset. This is also why time compression matters. Black swan shocks can accelerate changes that were already forming. In compressed seasons, those without stored capacity lose options first because there is no buffer. Different events can trigger the same structure: energy shocks, trade shocks, climate anomalies, financial crises. The event differs, but the cascade is similar. Pressure synchronizes across layers and society restructures. This is why covenant-minded believers and Goshen builders are not called to obsession. They are called to awareness. Genesis 41 teaches that stacked signals matter more than isolated headlines. Land and water is the first layer. Drought expansion, declining soil moisture, low rivers and reservoirs are early warnings, the modern echo of scorched grain. Food and staples is the second layer. When land stress persists, food price pressure and volatility often follow. This affects budgets, but it also affects social stability. Distribution is the third layer. Genesis 41 ends with nations traveling for bread, which teaches that roots and choke points matter. Scarcity can be created by blockage as much as by lack. Interpretation and trust is the fourth layer. Genesis 41 includes interpreter failure. When truth becomes hard to find and people cannot agree on what is real, the preparation window is wasted. Technology dependency is the fifth layer. Modern life depends on networks, power stability, and digital systems. Disruption can cascade quickly into finance, healthcare, logistics, and emergency response. This becomes a modern Nile. A hidden infrastructure becomes a provision artery. Governance response is the sixth layer. Genesis 41 shows centralized planning, storage, and distribution oversight. In modern tipping points, policy often tightens, rules multiply, and control structures strengthen. Storehouses require governance. Access and exchange is the seventh layer. Famine seasons can be accompanied by currency shifts and new rules for buying and selling. The watch point is whether access becomes conditional and whether the gate becomes narrower. The Joseph test for when strain becomes tipping. A Joseph tipping point is often visible when multiple layers move together. When land and water stress increases and distribution becomes tighter, and trust and interpretation weaken, and governance policy accelerates, the system is moving from strain to tipping. Genesis 41 verse 32 becomes a living discernment key. When warning signals repeat across different layers, the matter is established and hastened. That is not a call to fear, it is a call to move. Transition into readiness, the briefing becomes a drill. A briefing is not complete until it becomes a drill. Genesis 41 is not only meant to be understood, it is meant to be practiced. Joseph did not prevail because he was inspired. He prevailed because he built. Covenant-minded believers and Goshen builders must adopt a Joseph mindset: calm, clear, obedient, practical, prepared. Preparation is not panic. Preparation is wisdom. This drill is designed to be done slowly with a notebook and prayer. The goal is not anxiety. The goal is clarity. Begin with a simple map of life, household, neighborhood, community, congregation, and region. Joseph stored in cities, Genesis 41, verse 48. Provision must be near people. Identify the Nile of the region, the local provision artery. It might be a river system, an aquifer, a primary trucking corridor, a port, a major employer, a power plant, a healthcare hub, or the one pipeline that everything depends on. Ask one question. If this lifeline weakens, what collapses next? Watch land and water signs in a practical way. Has rainfall been abnormal? Are reservoirs low? Is the soil cracking? Are crops struggling? Are local producers changing plans? Is heat more intense and more frequent? Genesis 41 uses scorched grain imagery because environmental stress is an early layer. Watch distribution and access. Are store shelves inconsistent? Are deliveries delayed? Are costs rising? Are certain items becoming scarce? Are fuel disruptions affecting movement? Genesis 41 verses 54 to 57 shows the world traveling for bread. Distance and transport become part of survival. Watch interpretation and trust. Is truth hard to find? Are voices contradicting? Are people confused and reactive? Daniel 2 verses 2 to 11 shows what happens when a society cannot read the season. Return to scripture as the stabilizer. Deuteronomy 28 verses 15 to 24, Matthew 24 verse 7, Revelation 6 verses 5 to 6, Acts 7 verses 9 to 16. Set simple thresholds, not fear triggers, but action triggers. A threshold is the line where preparation moves from thought into execution. Genesis 41 did not wait for empty barns. Joseph began during abundance. Obedience should start early, not late. Choose responses that match the Joseph pattern. Increase stored capacity where possible. Strengthen relationships because Joseph preserved many lives. Build local supply lines because cities need storehouses. Create redundancy because one fragile channel is a trap. And maintain spiritual readiness because John 6 is the higher bread. Finally, rehearse faithfulness under gate pressure. Genesis 41 shows that access becomes a gate. Practice integrity, generosity, and discernment so provision does not become idolatry. The goal is not survival alone. The goal is preservation and witness. Closing charge Genesis 41 teaches a mercy pattern. God warns before pressure reaches its peak. God confirms what he reveals. God raises prepared vessels. God provides strategy, not just information. God preserves many lives. Joseph's wisdom, how to survive and thrive in Goshen. During the era of the New World Order, calls covenant-minded believers and Goshen builders to live in that same pattern. This hour does not reward noise. It rewards obedient preparation. Receive the warning as mercy. Treat repetition as confirmation. Move from discernment H 995 into wisdom H 2450. From wisdom into policy, from policy into storehouses, and from storehouses into preservation of many lives while remaining anchored to the bread of life. About the author and where to purchase Joseph's wisdom. How to Survive and Thrive in Goshen During the Era of the New World Order is written by Dr. Anne Ingraham, founder of Goshen Apostolic Institute and a kingdom strategist focused on equipping believers to build Goshen resilience in changing times. The book is available through Amazon. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this message. Subscribe to Goshen Apostolic Institute for teachings that equip end-time leaders, watchmen, prophetic voices, and kingdom builders.